and zoning. Okay, there we go. The voice from yonder told us is going, so. So with the call to order done, we will take citizens' comments. And just to let everybody know, this is citizen comments. Anybody can address the commission about anything unrelated to a public hearing that we will have tonight. So don't necessarily see anybody out there for public comments. So, go for it. Just your name and city of residence.
Okay, Dan Young, Lewiston. I'd like to talk to you about affordable housing tonight. There's a couple action items on your list that I think are contrary to affordable housing. The first one is the requiring the recreation area for multifamily. And I specifically looked at the apartments on Southway right next to Potlatch Credit Union. And based on the change that would be required, it looks like one of the buildings, one of the apartment buildings that was built, if this standard was in place, would not fit on the lot if there was an outdoor recreation area. So if your goal or the goal of the city is to have more affordable housing and provide housing that's more affordable, by adding stuff like this outdoor recreation area, it's going to make housing more costly. So it's to do the same thing, it's just gonna cost more, in my opinion. And there was some great discussion at the last meeting about, there's a need, and I stayed in this one apartment and it didn't have anything and I couldn't wait to get out of there, but it's still housing that's needed in the valley. And so as a developer, if the developer wants to put in the gazebo or put in whatever they want, and that helps attract renters, and then they can get more rent because it's a nicer place, go for it. But to make that a standard based on the topo, I think that's a mistake, personal opinion. The second.
Excuse me, sorry. Jennifer Tingano, City Attorney. This is set for a public hearing specifically for the outdoor recreation, so it's not appropriate for this particular topic, and it should wait until the public hearing is opened.
Is your other comment related to the public hearing? You'll have a chance to comment during the public hearing.
So that's it for that one. I did want to talk about the small lot development, which that hasn't gone on to the public hearing. That's still an action item that's being openly discussed. Is that right, Jennifer?
Mhm.
So I can't talk to that one? Okay. I'm still learning. And then the second one is the small lot. And I think you guys are familiar with me and the stuff that I've said in the past. Looking at the code, there's multiple residential codes, R2, R2A, R3, R4, and they all have standards for lot sizes, setbacks, standard information that's on all of the requirements for those subdivisions. But for some reason, small lot subdivisions now have these extra standards that were added. And two of the standards that I'm openly protesting are the garage recess and street trees. So the code was changed, in my belief, after talking with staff, the code was changed to try to get rid of the dominance of garages. So these garage dominant properties, we're gonna try to change the code, and you're gonna have to plant a street tree, and you're gonna have to recess the garage in front of the house to avoid the garage dominance. Well, so in my opinion, those are bad ideas. You got a 40-foot lot. We talked about why the trees won't work. And then when you recess the garage, it makes it look like a military barracks. So the goal of making it look garage not dominant worked, but it didn't address the fact that it still doesn't look fantastic. So the goal again is affordable housing. So the next proposition was 5 of 8. And we got into the weeds on the 5 of 8. And again, I don't know why this is the only subdivision that has this specific of standards. The lot sizes are there, the setbacks are there, driveway location, the corner lots, all of that information is there. So why do we need 5 of 8? Why do we need 5 of 10? So as you guys are going to discuss this tonight, you know, it's looking through these 5 of 10 things that address color change, texture change, building material change. And then looking at item number 2, now on item number 2, you can pick 3 of the following 4 elements. So you get so far into the weeds that it's hard to discern what this stuff means. So it's hard for the city, in my opinion, to enforce. It's hard for a developer to try to figure out how to go build something that meets these requirements. And I think you're gonna cause some long-term problems that I think just don't need to be there. And this was sent in an email a couple weeks ago, and I just printed it, and I'm gonna hand out a copy to everybody. It's basically the standards that are already in place with a couple small modifications. If you would pass that around. It directly, it's the code that was there, so I didn't create any new language. And it addresses the garage dominance. So the garage can't be bigger than 70%, which I agree with on the garage dominance. But to get in the weeds on 5 of 8 or 5 of 10 or whatever the number is, I'm strongly opposed. And that's all I've got to say. And I thank you guys for your time and volunteering again.
Thank you. All right, with that, I think that's it for public comments. So with that, we will move on to number 3, our active agenda. So that would be the approval of the November 13, 2024 meeting minutes. Did everybody get a chance to read those? Don't hear any thoughts on them other than they were good. So with that, I would take a motion to approve those meeting minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I so move.
I
And I
hear a
will
motion.
second.
Maureen seconded. We have a motion and a second, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Doesn't sound like any are opposed. So with that, the November 13 meeting minutes are approved. So our next item on the active agenda, item B, is public hearing for zoning code amendment ZA 0324. This is an action item. So for those listening online, the process for the public hearing is the meeting will open. We'll announce kind of the subject topic to the public. So we'll hear a staff presentation. After that, we will get testimony from the public. Commissioners, you can ask questions during that time. We'll close the public hearing, and then we'll have deliberation and articulated reasons for whatever recommendation we come up with. So with that, I'm going to open the public hearing, and we will have a staff presentation.
So this is a zoning code amendment that the commission discussed and formally initiated at your meeting on November 13th. This code amendment proposal comes to you as a recommendation from the Work Plan Development Committee for our new comprehensive plan. And it consists of a variety of different items. The first one is what amounts to an allowable increase in density in the R3 zone by default, because it's proposing to reduce the minimum lot area required for each dwelling unit after one. And it also reduces the minimum lot width required. The second part of it has to do with making amendments to the allowable uses in the R4 zone, that's the multifamily residential zone. So there's an amendment here for the purpose to reference limited commercial options in the zone. That was one of the recommendations of the committee, was to diversify the R4 zone by allowing limited small scale, scattered low impact neighborhood service businesses. Then you get into the specifics of that when you look at the uses permitted by right. It moves group daycare allowance from the conditional use permit list to the use by right list, making it easier for group daycares in the R4 zone. And then you get into the commercial amendments proposed for the allowance of those through the conditional use permit process at section 37-52. There is an addition of an allowance by conditional use permit for eating and drinking establishments, otherwise known as restaurants, except no drive-through facilities. Personal service uses, which are basically barber shops, things like that. Also as a conditional use, it's proposed to add professional offices except medical and dental, and except for banking services. Those ones that are, the exceptions are made for us because those are higher impact and generate more traffic. And then there's a catch-all as a conditional use to add a category that's called other limited commercial uses that are consistent with the purpose of the R4 zone and not detrimental to any of the permitted outright or conditional uses or to nearby residential uses. And that is consistent with almost all of the catch-alls we have in the conditional use permit list in other commercial zones. So that's just being consistent with that. So that's to add flexibility to diversify the uses allowed in the R4 zone with businesses that are small scale and low impact. The next part of this code amendment proposal is to reduce the allowable building height in the zone from 60 to 50 feet. Talked about that at the last meeting. There is an addition to a provision in the North Lewiston Mixed Development Zone to reference multifamily residential requirements being subject to section 37-124.1 because that is the location of the provision that's proposed to be added to require outdoor recreation area equivalent to a minimum of 5% of the lot area for multifamily residential development that exceeds 10 dwelling units overall. And likewise, there's a reference to that section being proposed for the Bryden Avenue Special Planning Area to capture multifamily development, outdoor recreation in those two zoning districts. And then the final amendment proposed with this zoning code amendment is to allow multifamily residential uses that are not on the ground floor of a building in the general commercial C6 zone. That was talked about extensively at the last meeting as well. That basically makes apartments above businesses allowed in the zone similar to what we allow in the C4 and the C5 zones already. And that's a summary of the proposal.
Do we have any questions? So Joel, there isn't anything different from this, or I guess my question is, there isn't anything different from this than what was discussed last meeting, which was when we were just discussing bringing this before the commission, correct?
Correct.
Joel, forgive me, and I didn't see this in any of the minutes from the last meeting, but as far as that C6 zone and apartments above businesses, is there anywhere in Lewiston, I can't think of it, but besides downtown, which is, that would apply at the moment?
There's a couple places on Thane that have second-story apartments.
Oh, okay.
Not a lot.
Yeah, it's not as prevalent up there, but there are a couple of buildings that do have second
Yeah, I
story.
mean, as long as there's, some in, because the downtown is not C6, is it?
No, it's C5,
Right. Okay.
Central Business District.
Right, okay, thank you.
The questions, thoughts, concerns?
So just because I'm looking at my phone rather than a.
No worries.
So, how many pages how many pages do I need to look through? Does this,
So the proposal begins on page 9 of the packet.
There are 6 total pages,
Oh, just 6 pages. Okay, then I'm good.
various zoning.
It's 9 through 14 of the meeting packet.
Thank you. I didn't know where to stop.
Make sure I do
Yeah,
have
more of that.
public comment that was sent in to read.
That's the whole.
no more questions from anybody? Okay, with that, we'll start public comment. So go ahead, Katie.
So the first one is from Mark Steiner, Lewiston, Idaho. I would ask the planning and zoning take the following into consideration for ZA 0324. Putting a requirement into city code should be used sparingly. There are many items that may be good ideas, but should not have the compelling weight of the law behind them. Please consider when should a "we would prefer you to" turn into a "we are forcing you to." For instance, I could believe that green and red are the best colors for a building. I could think that green and red buildings are the best thing for the community from an aesthetic point of view. I could think that red and green buildings would make Lewiston feel like a small town and not Seattle. I could further say that I don't know why anyone would rent an apartment that isn't painted red and green. I could believe this so much that I seek to have red and green be the color for all multifamily residential structures over 10 units through the power of the municipality code. Would I be correct to push my personal preference and viewpoint that far? The above example may seem silly, but swap out red and green with outdoor recreation space. If you support that part of the code change, please explain the difference between my example and what is proposed. The city code should not be used to force a small group of people's viewpoints on the entire town. This part of the zoning amendment feels like it is trying to solve a problem that hasn't actually been a problem, and that it is insufficient justification for a code change. For that reason, I would recommend the Planning and Zoning Commission vote to remove that section from the amendment. Thanks for your consideration, Mark Steiner, Lewiston, Idaho. And my second one, hi Dawn, I'm not able to make it to the meeting today, but wanted to attach this message to the meeting if possible. Lewiston has a major shortage of affordable housing. Adding a requirement for an outdoor recreation area will reduce the amount of housing built and increase housing costs. There will always be apartments that have outdoor recreation areas, but it should not be a requirement for all apartments. Many people that live in apartment buildings that have outdoor recreation areas don't use them. At the last meeting, someone said you can't build on the 20-foot rear yard setback, so you might as well use that for the outdoor rec area. However, that area is almost always used for parking to meet the parking requirements. Also, green areas and outdoor recreation areas are not the same thing. For example, if you had a planter strip surrounding an entire building that had bushes throughout it, I don't think that would be able to count as an outdoor recreation area since you can't do outdoor activities in a bush. One other thing to consider, outdoor recreation areas are usually on the ground with nothing above them, where apartment buildings are often multi-stories tall, so removing buildable area for an outdoor recreation area can exponentially reduce the amount of units. Lastly, there's a lot of regulations the city makes because they think it would be nice, but I don't think it's a good way to determine regulations. Regulations should be used sparingly and should either increase the safety or better the livelihood of those in Lewiston. However, I think this will make Lewiston worse, as it will worsen the huge problem we already have of housing shortage and high housing costs. Thank you for your time. Jeremy Edwardson, Lewiston, Idaho. Okay, those will do it.
Mr. Chair?
Mhm.
One thing else I wanted to point out that I failed to mention in my presentation was this is not a new idea. It already exists in city code for other types of higher density residential development. For example, the mobile home park provisions require a minimum of 5% outdoor recreation area for mobile home parks, as do developments for RV parks and for tiny house villages. All have that same provision already because they were most recently rewritten. And so that went through the public hearing process for those. At that time, it wasn't thought to go into the R4 zone because there weren't any other changes proposed to R4 zone. It wasn't being rewritten like the other ones, but this would make multifamily residential consistent with those other ones that already have that requirement.
I have a question. That's a good question.
Just as a reminder, we do still have members of
I
the
know.
public here for the public comment portion.
This is a question. It said here that there was a small, one of these units that was built that was required to have some recreation area. Am I correct?
There's an apartment complex,
It's-
yes.
An apartment
It was
complex.
not small.
It was not
was-
small. And so, could it be done on a case-by-case basis?
That one was, the one that was required to have it was through, as a condition of approval of a use permit.
Okay. And so did that go through your department or did it come through here? I don't remember
Well,
seeing.
it was a use permit, so
It
it
was a
went through
use
the public
permit
hearing
through here.
process.
So at the time when they're applying for a conditional use permit, then that could be required.
Yes,
Okay,
but not all multifamily residential developments require conditional use permits.
okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And that one, that was a condition of approval, that you're referencing. I calculated it, it was, they provided 7.5% of the overall property as outdoor recreation area.
So before we commissioners have any final questions, we'll just finish up with the public comments. So, Dan, I don't know if you had anything else that you wanted to add, because this is the public comment period,
Public hearing.
or public hearing, excuse me.
Dan Young, Lewiston. I'm gonna be very brief because everything that was just said is kind of redundant of what I was saying and thinking. So I'm referring to the Bloom Apartments, one where the 7.5% is on Fifth there by the TV station. And then the other one is on Southway. And I don't believe there was any requirements for the one on Southway. And I interviewed somebody that actually lived at the ones by the TV station for 7 years. And I asked, did you ever use the gazebo or the green area? And they said, no, not one time in 7 years did I use that space. So I like the fact that through the conditional use, it was forced to be put in place because that was not 10 units. That was a much larger area. But the actual use of those facilities, if you get into a piece of property that has topo issues and now you're stuck on the 5%, it kind of puts the developer in a box. And if affordable housing is the goal, it's going to drive the cost up no matter how hard you try. That's it. Thank you.
So I guess my question is, I know we've kind of beaten this to death a little bit with, or also, I know we questioned you a little bit too, Joel and Katie, on this at the last meeting. So are there any ways for developers to ask for an exemption for this or anything like that?
So, Dan mentioned topographic issues. That's a typical kind of condition to a property that would warrant a variance.
Okay. But variances are extremely hard to get, correct?
But that's an example of the type of
Okay.
situation that warrants serious consideration of granting a variance.
Okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
I know Kathy brought up the case by case and TUP. The term affordable housing has been thrown around a lot. Is it possibility to apply this exemption or whatnot? Or I just shouldn't say that, apply a requirement for the low cost housing as like related to percentage of the poverty rate or anything like that, if they're gonna be required to have that outdoor recreation space so they can utilize all the, and get the cost down, but they have to pass down those savings to people that are renting, because that's what the argument is
Not,
because,
not through the zoning code, that would require a development agreement.
okay? So, I mean, because then maybe I'm seeing it wrong, that the affordable housing argument seems like a Trojan horse.
Well,
Right? Or I could be
we don't
wrong.
have a definition of affordable housing. The term's used a lot, but,
Right.
it's generally the case that the more housing stock you have in place, the lower the cost is going to be.
Yeah, supply and demand.
Right.
I will say too, we have kept this, or at least to my understanding, this is fairly opaque in terms of what the green space or what the space can be. So for example, it's not requiring a developer to literally plop 5% of land contiguously touching each other in terms of it has to be in the middle of the property, the edge of the property, here, and here. It is a cumulative 5% of the entire property. So that, in my mind, that gives the developer a little bit of leeway in how they create their development so that they're not creatively boxed in, I guess is how I would describe it. And that is sort of where I agree with Kevin to the degree that the affordable housing component, to me, it's not designed in such a way that it is creating automatically an additional cost to the property, because I think there are many other variables that will either add or detract from the cost of a development. But again, that's just the way I view it, in my opinion.
And to piggyback off of that, you can't build on the full amount of land that you have. There's space that is gonna,
Granted, yeah.
yeah,
Well, just like our housing standards for building a home, you can only build on percentage
right.
of the property. And we already know with any development, you're going to have a certain percentage that is allowed to be a building, a certain percentage that's allowed to be parking lot. And I think what we're trying to get away from with this is where everything is building, parking lot, sidewalk. Like, you know, and I mean, it doesn't have to be, like we talked about last meeting, it doesn't have to be green space. I think everybody kind of gets caught up into that idea of green space. But like we were talking about, you know, with the Canyon Crest ones, they have walking trail. And that's recreational area.
Okay, so I'm thinking about this through, so if you're looking at keeping the costs down, sometimes the cheapest way to do it is just plant grass. Could they just plant grass in that 5% area and not have any other, I mean, so people could bring out their own tables if they wanted to have a little picnic or lay out their blankie. Or a lot of places have, you know, it's nice to have a place to walk your dog so they can do their little,
I believe
What-
grass was considered a portion of it.
yeah, I mean, could you have it all grass?
Yeah.
Except for the trees that are required as whatever, I think
So-
there's probably some,
So that means,
but somebody has to take care of it.
I mean, if I may, that means that we're not talking about an outdoor recreation area that is like basketball court or a baseball field or anything like that. It's just
It could be.
I mean, it could, yeah,
It could,
no,
but it
because,
doesn't
you know,
have to.
these terms that we're talking about bring certain things to my mind. So an outdoor recreation pops into my head as a basketball court kind of thing, but it's not that's not green. But affordable housing doesn't mean the general area of the housing is cheaper, but affordable housing is for people who have trouble affording housing. So, but yeah, okay. Just wanted to make
So
sure I was
are
thinking
you gonna
clearly.
have gravel? out
It's
there?
not like we're requiring a playground.
Right.
Right.
But
Yeah.
the
But
term,
that was put in there. I'm gonna read it a little bit more carefully.
yeah, it includes active or passive recreation.
Okay.
So would just a grassy area and a gravel area count as passive recreation? Or do you have to have toys on it?
So the,
Nope, passive is grass.
piece
That's
for
It doesn't
the
require that.
industry,
The way it's written.
It says which
Yeah.
may include, but is not limited to, so
Right.
grass, trees, shrubs.
See, that's
picnic
what I
tables,
wanted to get
playground
clear in
equipment.
my head.
Yeah.
So it doesn't, it's not saying shall, it says may.
Like I
Me.
said, even if you had a walking path,
They
And
would
that's,
need
that was a significant part of the 7.5% outdoor recreation area for the Bloom Apartments on
Yeah.
up the hill from the mall.
Yeah.
They've got an extensive walking path there.
Yeah.
Have they really been there more than 7 years?
Oh, yeah.
that,
Time flies.
you know, I mean, that's, you look at that, that's low maintenance. But it encourages getting out and moving.
Right, well, just grass and gravel, that's it. Just grass.
Question.
Yes, go for it.
So as far as the trees go, so it states that 1.5-inch caliber shade tree per 350 square feet of outdoor recreation area. So that, is that just if it was in one spot? Would have to have. We're talking about spacing out the recreational area. how do you determine?
I would think, I mean, from a reviewing
It's
perspective, I would think,
cumulative.
yeah, it would be cumulative, and so we would look at like a plan. And you would, the developer would identify each area, right? And I would be like, okay, so this section, we have 700 feet here, right? We have 2 trees, and we have 500 feet over here, and we have 1 tree, right? If they're gonna break it up, I would look at it cumulatively.
And there is an RV park in North Williston that's like that. They've got 3 separate spaces. And one of them is quite small. So that's an example of what you were talking about, Gabe, with the cumulative effect and spreading it out. It doesn't have to be one contiguous space. That
Yeah,
RV
'cause
park
they have
has
one like
3,
that's part
one
of
in the
their-
center,
Up
and
like
then on
one
the north end,
edge.
there's kind of a longer one on the west side and a much shorter one on the east, northeast corner.
Yeah, because they use their, one of their yard setbacks.
Yeah.
So I think they were required to have, I don't remember what it was for that zone. It was 15 or 20 feet, and that whole area is one portion of it, and then they have and like, that's like their dog run area, if I remember correctly, and so they
It
have
is.
that whole piece on the one side, and then like in the center, they have like their common building, that has like their shower houses and stuff like that. And then they had an additional, I think there's a little bit of grass, but it's mostly like picnic tables, and I think they have like a gazebo in the middle. And then they had the other piece, like Joel was saying, like in one of the corners. Again, just a grass area, and I think there's a tree.
Divvy up the trees.
Yep.
And the other Bloom Apartments on Southway Avenue, I looked at that one today as well. They have space on the south side of the property. It sits up on top of a retaining wall. But it could have access from the east end of it and from the west end of it, from the parking lot. Didn't look like it was so steep that it wasn't walkable to get up to it. And if that were required on that property, and if it was accessible, we'd have to verify that, you know, it was actually practical to walk it. And it looks like it would be, that would be a minimum of, that would be 11% of that property. And that's just the piece on the south side. There's another strip on the north side, and I didn't even go there.
So if, can I have another question? So if my lot size was 3,000, what's a good lot size?
10,000 square feet.
10,000
Oh, you mean
square
not for an
feet
apartment?
for an
For an
apartment.
apartment,
Would
maybe
you-
20.
When-
20,000
yeah,
square
When
feet.
you're talking 10 units or more.
You're looking, yeah, you're
If
probably
you take
talking.
5% of 20,000, then you're looking at
That's 1,000.
1,000 square feet. On that.
And of that 20,000, you can only, so say you're in the R3.
R3, just go by that new,
You
that
can
new,
cover 50% of that lot with buildings. So that wipes 10,000 square feet that you're gonna cover with buildings, right? So that leaves 10,000 square feet for your parking lot and.
Your green area, well, your recreational area.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things that we have to consider too is, you know, kind of going off of what Kevin was saying, you know, when everybody talks about affordable housing, but like Jennifer brought up at our last meeting, we also have to consider the fact that there are a lot of people who have service animals, things like that. And if you've got nothing but parking lot, it then eliminates that entire, you know, structure for somebody who has a service animal because there is no place to take that service animal out. And so I think that by having that blend, you know, we're providing an opportunity for the majority of the population, you know, we're broadening that out.
I would agree with that. My daughters had lived in a lot of apartments. It seems like almost at least every other person has a dog or whatever that they take out. And I've sat on her deck and watched people go out and walk their animals with their little plastic bags and every morning. And I mean, it's a good idea.
And if all you've got is building and parking lot, there is
Then you have to
no
find another place.
place. And that, you know, I mean, if you had somebody who, especially if they have a service animal because they, you know, are dependent upon that animal and they don't have the ability to just, you know, hop in the car and go to the local dog park or what have you to walk that animal. What are you gonna do? Wait for the bus to come pick you up so you can take your dog out? You've gotta have some space where you're living.
So before I know we're kind of sort of venturing into deliberation a little bit here, so before we formally do that and I close the public hearing, any last questions for staff? Before I close the public hearing, we're all okay with that? All right. With that, then I'll close the public hearing. And then we will deliberate and articulate our reasons for our proposed recommendations. So.
Chair, this is a legislative matter. You don't have to deliberate on specific criteria for anything.
Okay, that was gonna be my next question. I didn't see any of the requirements we usually see, so, we can kind of just have at it in terms of why we feel the way we do. So I'll kind of do this the way I've seen it done before and kind of do a round table with everybody. And, Mo, not to put you on the spot, but, kind of how do you feel about it?
I think that the proposed change is obviously part of the work plan committee. And so I think what we've come up with, I think is wonderful. I think it's going to, with the changes to the R3 designation and the ability to have folks be able to expand on their own lots and loosen up those requirements. Awesome. I think us expanding the R4 and having that, a lot of those things that are by right now, instead of having to go through conditional use permits. One of the biggest ones I think for me was the in-home daycare, because I think that fulfills a need. And then for what we talked about in work plan committee, a big portion of that too was talking about the fact that realtors are constantly looking for houses that have the ability for somebody to do a small in-home office, psychologists, what have you. And I think that that's going to expand those opportunities for those people. And like I said, I don't have an issue with the 5% outdoor recreational area. I think that it can be achieved fairly easy with a little bit of creativity. And like we brought up, you can only use so much of the lot anyway for building and parking space. So it's gonna kind of be built in.
Kathy?
I don't have anything to add.
You don't have anything to add? Okay. I will say, I'll piggyback off what Mo said and just say that the changes to the code for the most part here are to allow people to better utilize their spaces and look at creative ways to expand housing inventory and use here in the city. I know the section about the outdoor recreation has gotten most of the comments in regards to this change. And I will say that I do agree. I personally believe that there should be a light hand of government in terms of zoning code and all levels of governance. But I also do, from what we understand, from what we've discussed, that the way the code is set up is in such a way that you can only use so much of the property for building space. And also the way this is written allows developers a lot of leeway in what they can and can't do for that green space, whether that be, doesn't have to be contiguous. It doesn't really define what exactly is a recreation area. So we're not talking about a basketball court. So while I understand the comments and concerns around requiring it, I think it's a requirement that can be met with, as Mo said, a little bit of creativity and thought. So, I mean, I like these changes to the code, and I think it addresses a lot of major issues or potential issues that we'll see. And it's thinking outside the box a little bit in terms of creating more inventory and uses here in Lewiston in these codes. So those are my thoughts.
I don't think I have anything to add to that.
I left you speechless? No, I'm just kidding.
I don't really have too much to add either. I think what we have makes sense and again, the recreation area is kind of a hot topic, it seems like, but 5% really isn't that much. I mean, and if you look at their cities and apartments, most of them have a green space. You know, I also think of it as, how do you bring families into the valley? Like, what are they looking? They're looking for a safe place for their kids to play, you know, and if you have that in your apartment complex, that kind of checks a box. So it's also just, and I understand it from a developer's side, but you also have to look at comprehensive plan too, like how do we bring families in and make it a place for people to want to live.
The only thing that I would add to that is that it is greater than 10 units as well, so that just adds to what everyone else has already said.
I think with those comments, I will accept a motion to at least make a recommendation on these proposed zoning changes or zoning code amendments, excuse me.
Here, I will make a motion to recommend approval of ZA 03-24 to the city council.
Second.
Kevin, it's
Sorry.
been motioned and second, so with motion and the second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Doesn't sound like it, so with that, our recommendation to approve will go to the city council. All right, so that takes care of item B on our agenda. So item C we have on our agenda is a zoning code amendments, ZA ZA-04-24 small lot development standards amendments. And this is an action item. So does staff have a presentation for us, or is it just discussion?
No, it's just discussion, just to introduce it. You've already reviewed this extensively at your prior meeting. You asked staff to make a couple of changes and bring it back to you to see what it looked like after those changes were made for you to reconsider before you decided if you wanted to formally initiate the process to make the code amendment. So oh, no, it's already been initiated by the
If
city
you wanted to
council.
schedule.
Schedule the public hearing.
We're
Yeah.
working on it, yep.
Yep. So staff did that. We added to the shopping list items 9 and 10, which you talked about at the end of your meeting last time. And so that's the change that's been made since you reviewed it last.
We did want you guys to, we had talked about this briefly, to make sure that number 10 is worded in a way, because this was one that a lot of you were excited about adding, is worded in a way that makes sense to everybody. So number 10 is there shall not be more than 3 detached homes in succession or 4 attached 0 lot line homes in succession with the same visual building design. So this was that discussion about at subdivision as part of the plat. You ask for changes in design, right? And that way you're not stuck with 100 houses in a row that all look exactly the same.
Yeah, this one's pretty-
And so then we put home shall vary in at least 2 of the following 4 ways. So a developer is able to pick which 2 ways they're going to change their design. So building configuration, i.e. size, height, shape, footprint, building orientation and or location on the lot, that's turned, pushed farther back, so there's some variation in spacing, and then street facing facade color and design, or the roof design. This would be to the extent that they offer a visual identification distinction, so that you're not seeing the same
Cookie
thing.
cutter.
Yes.
Yeah.
We wanted to make sure that the way that that is written makes sense to you guys.
It'll be administered by staff, but
Because we would do that review and we read code all the time, but from a layperson standpoint, we would like for you to read through that and be like, yes, I understand what that is asking.
No. I think that we're on this we discussed E quite a bit, and maybe that's what we're discussing right now, or part of it. I would like to see on number 4 on E, see, was that one? Yeah, it says that the garage door shall be recessed at least 4 feet from the adjoining habitable face wall. Is there any way that we can add either recessed or extended at least 4 feet? So come out this way, not only is it okay to recess it, but okay to extend it at least for, so we just don't have a flat line.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so, and he wanted, as part of his plan, he wanted to extend it. And so I think it'd be nice to be able to give people the option to either recess or extend the garage.
Sure, we can do that.
Yeah.
That's the consensus of the commission.
I like that idea as well.
I'm not opposed to it, yeah. I think
I'm
that's
open.
fine.
Let's see what else.
To avoid that barracks looking. flat.
Yes, yeah, I
Yeah.
just, it's.
I
nice
just think
like
by
that.
allowing, instead of it being, basically, the way it was originally written, 5 out of 8, now it's 5 out
Now
of
it's 5
10.
out of 10.
And 5 out of 10, to me, seems like
Did you notice that?
that's a pretty expansive list.
And they all have different, I mean, they're all gonna, in terms of their requirements, they're all gonna vary based on
Yeah.
the natural elements, as I call it, for a property. So even though there are, I don't know if I even view these in the same way as a requirement, simply because
No.
they don't, it's not additional things that they have to meet. It's things that they can't, that they have the option to meet.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and like, I think the point that we made last time was the fact that this is not a small lot development is something that you have to opt in for. You have to specifically request that. And if you're going to specifically request that, you know what you're getting into, you know
Yeah.
what you're taking on because you're making the request. And we've already, had to do the zoning changes on it, the annexation on it, the small lot development request, and it's like,
And it should be noted, it's been discussed a lot about, like, there's already lot sizes, there's already width and depth dimensions in code. Small lot development is smaller than any of them.
yeah,
And, okay, on number 2, we had all these little bay windows, window boxes, blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
we struck the bolt-on ones.
yeah.
Yeah,
And-
yeah.
Or other similar features. I did have a feature that I wanted to add to that, if I could, porch railing. I think a lot of times people, and that could be
Oh,
as an idea. And it's not really as similar as a window box or but something along a porch railing.
I think
Yeah,
that
'cause
could
we
be,
have had people, build small lot that did not have the railing. It still had like a defined porch area,
Or a
right?
defined-
But not the railing.
So that would be an idea for just another option for people to think about. And they might have their own other idea that would be acceptable, but I was just thinking.
I think we're just looking for things that kind of break it up a little bit.
Right.
That's the biggest thing, is I just don't want to see it to where, you always see that in big cities where you go into a subdivision and every house looks alike and you're like,
You get lost?
yeah, you're absolutely
it's
lost.
true.
2 minutes in, you're like,
You live.
yeah,
Consensus of the commission on porch railings.
I think that's a good one to add to it,
Yeah.
yeah. Vegas is horrible for those cookie cutter developments.
Yeah.
And every development looks the same. So if you turn into the wrong
We don't really
development,
have requirements for subdivisions.
What's that?
Do we have requirements for subdivisions as far as looks and aesthetic?
Not unless they're in a, like.
Some
planned unit
homeowners.
development.
No, because
Our planned unit developments often have those. And that's, I mean, the small lot development was kind of, written like to copy that. Because we have a lot of people who are using PUD process instead of using small lot development to be able to get like the smaller lot sizes. And so then in exchange for that, basically, they were doing design elements.
Well, that was mainly used for the infill things as opposed to large, vast.
you do have just, I don't know if this has been presented to you before. So I'll mention it. We do have at least 2 zoning districts where there are design standards required for any development in the zone. So if your property is zoned one of those 2 zones, like Bryden Avenue Special Planning Area A or form an impact-based zone, you don't have a choice. You have to do design standards.
Okay.
Unlike this, which the developer chooses, they opt in.
And then they choose which elements they want to hit.
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
meet.
But in the Brighton Avenue Special Planning Area, there is no choice. There's no shopping list. It's just a list and you have to do
Yeah.
all of these.
But I think, I think this is my thought process. If you're going to opt into this small lot development, we're already, as a body, making a lot of concessions as to like lot size and things like that. I think expecting a builder to meet us halfway and make it to where it doesn't become one of those just little, cookie cutter stamp, 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 stamp. I don't think that's unreasonable,
And I think to the extent that that the testimony we've heard is saying that won't, my understanding is the testimony we've heard is that that type of cookie cutter won't really sell either way.
Right.
So I'm agreeing with you, Mo, in terms of that we're making that concession.
Yeah, but at the same time, just because one developer has no intention of doing that, doesn't mean that another developer couldn't come in here and do it.
Mhm.
And, there you are, you have development and it's that way because go ahead, do whatever you want,
Yeah.
And that's the thing it's that slippery slope argument of, I like to call it the law of unintended consequences.
Mm. Yeah.
It's not just developers though that can choose this.
Mhm.
I mean, a single person can decide that they would like a small lot and try to apply for it.
If there was subdivision property, it would have to be subdivided property. You can't just be
Only,
like,
only for,
my lot is small and I want small development. You would be subdividing property under one of the zones that allows it, or you would come in and you would ask for a conditional use permit from this body so that you could move forward with that subdivision of your land, which would allow for the
So
smaller
it's-
lots.
mainly just for those looking to do subdivisions. Is that-
So
But I mean, a
I mean,
subdivision
yes,
doesn't
it's a
have to be
subdivision.
50, 60
right, there's
units.
no-
You could have a couple of acres and want to subdivide your property, and build a family compound.
Yeah, these provisions used to have a minimum number of units that you had to,
Okay.
or a minimum number of lots.
Right.
Contiguous lots that you had to develop on in order to qualify for it. And we saw that as a barrier. Developers were telling us that was a barrier for them, so we took that minimum number of lots out. There's no minimum number of lots, so it could be two.
So,
there's-
yeah, so you could have a small piece of property and decide you want to subdivide it and build another unit on that property. And yeah, there should be some standards.
one thing I don't think that we have on these standards, which I kind of like from Katie's presentation that you made, and I had you send me a copy of it. Primary building entries are clearly identifiable and invisible from the street, and that's in here. But it says with well-defined walkways from the pedestrian routes to the building entries. And I don't know, do we have that addressed in here?
No.
Now, what do you think about that?
Say that again, Kathy?
Well-defined walkways from the pedestrian routes to the building entries. Like a sidewalk up to the front door, or,
Clearly visible.
yeah. I mean, it's just a thought that was on her presentation that I didn't know that was on here.
That makes sense. I mean, we could bundle that under
At number 2,
number 2. So it would be,
What is
it would
it?
be in that category of a minimum of 3, and it would just be one of the elements, one of the 3 that they need to hit under number 2.
right, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, we could add that to that as an option.
As an
for one
option
of
to
their
meet that
things.
requirement. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which honestly, I mean, that's not, in my mind, that's not a super hard requirement to meet because you have to put
It's
in
not
sidewalks if you're
unreasonable.
doing a
Yeah.
development anyway.
a lot of people, so they literally just alongside the driveway have
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
a walkway.
Yeah.
Or if they wanted to, where a lot of people put the porch in the middle.
Right.
Split your yard. That could be a design element that they could add.
We did add 9 to kind of address that
Okay.
shared, which wall is your shared common wall? And that kind of goes to that idea, because that was one of the other things you guys had liked from the last presentation. So that one says for 0 lot line attached dwelling units that have attached garages, the common wall between the units shall separate the habitable space, such as the garages are not adjoining, so that's just another design element. So
Yeah.
instead of having your garages together, you have your habitable space and your garages on the
Yeah.
ends, right?
Yeah. And then you could put a walkway up the center and another design.
I've seen it that way too.
That way it also separates which lawn belongs to who.
Right.
Who's mowing what.
That really does make a difference too.
Oh, yeah, I
It's a
had that
lot.
experience. That half of grass is your half of grass and I'm not mowing it for anything.
You get the HOA involved.
Yeah.
Oh, Joey.
Anyway, just another idea.
So are we comfortable scheduling or
Public hearing,
moving
yep,
forward with a public hearing?
I am,
Okay.
yep.
Do we need a vote on that or a voice vote on that or anything?
No.
No? Okay. Alright.
Yeah.
Schedule it.
Alright, I think there's a general consensus. We'll move forward this with a public hearing. All right, so with that completed, we are on to item D, which is initiation of zoning code amendment ZA 05 24 off-street parking requirements.
So this is another code amendment that's coming to you as a recommendation from the comp plan, work plan committee. The proposal is to amend the minimum number of parking spaces required to be 50% of what the current requirement is, and on top of that, to establish a maximum allowable number of parking spaces. And that is 125%, 100% of what's
100%,
allowed.
but we also addressed it last time that we allow overflows.
Yeah, overflow parking doesn't, I mean, that's still allowed, still do more through the overflow. So yeah, you also talked about this, well, on your November 5th, meeting. No, that's the, comp plan, work plan development committee talked about it on November 5th. And then in your packet, there was a certain number of pages of an article that talks about the benefits of reducing the minimum number of required off-street parking spaces. And the committee looked at all the different options that communities could do to facilitate development through parking requirements. And the two things that they chose were cutting the minimum number in half and capping it at a maximum of 100%. Well, that's what they recommended off that list that's in the article. So those two were supposed to be determined to be significantly effective.
Avoid those parking kind of deserts.
Yes, yes.
So
That we have.
kind of leaves it up to the developer in the market to determine how much parking to provide, more so than what the current requirements are.
One allows flexibility for
Yeah.
places.
So are we moving this?
We're asking the commission
They
to
want a
decide
public
if you
hearing
want
on
to
it?
formally initiate it
Oh, okay.
and
And
schedule it for hearing, or if you just don't like the idea altogether.
how's everybody feel about it? I know Mo and I are
We're on
on the
board.
committee, so I kind of want to get others' input as well. Anybody have any?
I'm on
Yes.
board.
I guess I have a question, so. In the definition of off-street parking, so. It's usually something like a parking garage or like parking lot, correct? Is that kind of what you guys are thinking as far as like off-street parking?
Yeah, parking lots primarily.
And then that typically is. you design that, that's usually like engineer and that sort of thing. So I guess I'm wondering why this falls under the category of us making a decision and why it's not Public Works.
Well, because it's private property. Public Works
related-
only deals with right of way side, the public side of the street line. Zoning code, planning and zoning commission deal with everything on private side of the line, which is parking lots,
And it's related to the use of the property.
the
So-
land use. It's by category of land use.
They'll include commercial.
And apartment buildings.
Yeah, it's a very simple way, without having to go through every single land use type listed in the parking provisions and determine, well, should we change this number of this land use type to this or this one to this? It's just a blanket. All land use is 50% of what's currently required.
One of my concerns is that we're very reliant. And we do not have pedestrian infrastructure to kind of make that switch. So I guess my concern is they're still going to be looking for places to park. They're gonna find places to park. There's places that we like or not like. So I think until we have the pedestrian infrastructure, we can't really look at reducing the amount of parking spots.
Well, so like, the way I look at this is like, if I'm building a house. And right now, the parking requirements for my home is based on the number of bedrooms that I have in my house, right? So if I'm looking at building a house and I'm building a 5-bedroom house. It, as part of the current plan, I have to have so many, 4 parking spots, basically.
Yeah.
So the requirements would be that I would have to have 4 off-street parking spots for my home, which means I would have to have probably 2 in the garage and a driveway big enough to fit 2 as well, which automatically eats up a big portion of my property that I'm building for my house. If I'm, a parent with small kids and there's me and my husband and we're both driving, that's 2 cars. I can fit them both in the garage,
I mean, we're not just talking about houses though.
But this would just give me the option to only have to have those 2 parking spots instead of 4. Right now, it would require me to have 4.
I mean,
Doesn't mean that I couldn't have 4.
Yeah, it doesn't stop a developer
no.
from doing the 100%, right?
Yeah.
But I think the thought of the committee is that it opens up the ability for more buildings that exist to be used in more ways.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
when we
Additional
receive,
development pads like the old Kmart parking lot.
Yeah.
It could open up development pads there.
Yeah.
For business, so one of the examples I think you might be thinking of is like, say, a warehouse where you ship things or you make things and where you might, during the Christmas season, you might get busy and you need 2 shifts instead of 1. That is where that overflow component comes in as well, so that we're not artificially limiting businesses. Because you talked about moving it outside of just houses, where we don't limit businesses to not having enough parking spaces to accommodate overflow or the busy season, based on when their busy season is.
And we're not cutting how many they can have. They can still have up to 100% of what it's saying now. We're just saying you don't have to have 100% of what it's saying now. So if you open, you're a hairstylist and you open a small salon, and currently the requirement is that you have 5 off-street parking spots. And there is just no way for you to find a place that you can afford to put in your salon and have 5 off-street parking for your clients and your people that work there, et cetera, et cetera. That gives you a little bit of flexibility in locations that you could actually utilize.
I think that's where we'll see the most use of this portion of the code, because frequently we will have a building being used as one type, right? And say it was something that had a really low occupant load or a really low ratio of parking spaces to square footage.
And they want to convert it to a restaurant.
And they'll
or
want to convert it to
store.
something
retail space.
that has a much higher density. in need for parking or square footage, or in Joel's example, restaurant, so that's like one per table, right, or four top table. We frequently have to turn people away from those sorts of buildings because they can't meet the parking requirements. I think that in the committee's discussions, we kind of walked through that and the different, like Joel said, instead of taking the time and the enormous amount of work it would require to go through each and every different kind of use that is identified currently in parking code, and to weigh, is that an appropriate number of parking spaces? And then to research what other places are doing and what might be a better number for each individual one. This is kind of a blanket way of being like, okay, if we reduce this total number, you can still, like say a new build, you can still put in as many as this says. But if you're going into an existing building with an existing parking lot that was a different use than what you were proposing, and maybe they had a lower parking need than what you were proposing, but you still think you can make that work, I think it'll open up the ability for different kinds of businesses to utilize existing buildings with existing parking
The
lots.
fact of the matter is, if you look at most parking lots in the city that were developed according to our minimum off-street parking requirements, they're
Parking lots are
hardly
open.
ever
Yep.
full.
Yeah.
So the idea is a business owner is not going to put in such a low number of parking spaces that they won't be able to get all the business that they want to have. A lot of jurisdictions are actually eliminating minimum numbers of parking spaces required altogether. The comp plan work plan committee didn't want to go that far. They thought 50% reduction was a good start. I know Sandpoint just recently eliminated all off-street parking requirements. They're totally leaving it up to the market.
So next step,
If the committee is good with it, we can schedule a public hearing for this and move forward. So, is the committee okay with moving forward on that?
Yep.
Scheduling a
You
public
need
hearing?
a motion to initiate this.
Motion to initiate the amendments.
So with that, I would take a motion to initiate the amendments.
Motion to initiate zoning code amendments recommended by the Comprehensive Plan Work Development Committee to implement a reduction in minimum required off-street parking spaces, required and maximum number of off-street parking spaces allowed for all land uses.
I will actually second that motion. I might as well get in on it somewhere. So, there's been a motion and a second. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No, nobody opposed, so we will look forward to seeing that on our agenda in the future. So item E we have on our active agenda is the initiation of zoning district, or the initiation of a zoning district boundary change for zoning map, or for ZNC 24-5, rezone properties along 21st Street and Thane Road corridors and in or near, or and in and near the Sunset neighborhood from R2 and R2A to R3 and R4. We might have a map pulled up for us.
Bunch of maps.
Perfect.
Share this.
Yeah.
You know, they pass her around. I think it's,
Yeah.
Committees.
Yeah, there you go.
This is fairly familiar to us.
We looked at a lot of
No,
maps.
I think you did.
We've got
Map
big
dance,
maps
like,
we look at.
I love big maps.
It's been.
okay, well, evidently, we're not gonna have a slideshow because
Oh,
that computer is also not connected to the network, so
Uh-oh.
we'll just talk. Okay, so I gave everybody a copy of the land use map from the comp plan, and I apologize, this was the best way I could figure to do it. So on the map, I've drawn little black boxes, right?
Mhm.
Little tiny black boxes, and then I've said Sunset, map 1, map 4, map 3, map 2. There are 10 maps total. So the work plan committee has been reviewing different sections of the land use code from the comp plan about, how do we make improvements, basically. So some of the ones that we've specifically identified under our goals and objectives and actions from the action plan are LU 1.1, which is optimizing zoning alignments, align incompatible zoning and land uses and development regulations with the future land use map to establish consistent and compatible growth patterns. LU 1.1.1, conduct a comprehensive review of the land use code to identify and modify zoning regulations that do not align with the desired development outlined in the future land use map and the land use category designation. LU 2 is provide housing choices throughout Lewiston. H 2.2 is reduce barriers to missing middle housing typologies, and then study and reduce barriers to allow for additional housing typologies that are not currently being built. So like this body has heard and discussed, affordable housing is a hot topic, workforce housing is a hot topic, and that missing middle housing, something that's in between detached single-family dwellings and then large apartment complexes, also a hot topic. And then H 2.1.1, conduct a review of the land use code and implement modifications to facilitate diverse scale appropriate housing options. And 2.2 is reduce barriers to missing middle housing typologies, study and reduce or eliminate barriers to allow for traditional housing typologies that are not currently being built. So as part of that discussion in the work group, we spent some time looking at this map and our current zoning maps. So in your guys' packet, and I apologize that I can't show you all my pretty pictures, there were a series of maps with little green boxes. And then a map that's not as pretty because this is old GIS and this is new GIS, and half of them were made and then, so the staff went through, identified areas that we thought it would be appropriate to establish buffer zones. So that would be your R4, which is your higher density residential, and then step down to R3, which is that medium density residential, before going into our R2 and R2A, which is our low density residential. Because right now, you go from that commercial corridor straight into low density. There's no buffer. And the kind of the goals and objectives of both the medium and the higher density residential zones are to help facilitate that buffer between commercial and low density. So the idea is to kind of systematically scooch down that path of the commercial corridors and identify areas that would be most appropriate to transition to either the higher density or the medium density before we get into those lower density neighborhoods. So the first 10 maps are those sections looking to attach to existing R3 and R4 zones, because there are pockets that kind of follow along that commercial corridor. So it goes all the way from about 11th Avenue, all the way up to where Thane turns into Ribbon. So the entire stretch, we've identified the areas that are going from commercial straight to a low density residential. And we have outlined neighborhoods that would be appropriate because of their location to transition up to either the medium or the higher density residential. In addition to identifying all of those different areas, I have spent some time talking to folks in the Sunset Park area, one of the older neighborhoods developed in the 40s and the 50s. When it was developed, it was prior to any of the existing zoning codes. And kind of a standard of development at that time was to have lots that were 50 feet wide by 142 feet deep, which is about 7,100 square feet. So a majority of the lots in those areas, in that area, are to that standard, or sometimes smaller. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger, but a lot of times they're right there, or they're a weird shape and they're smaller. So those don't meet the standards for R2. And I will frequently get calls and people want to add a unit to their house and make it a duplex, are trying to sell their house and want to know what the rebuild status is, because that's a big factor for financing nowadays. And a majority of those lots are what is considered by code non-conforming, because they don't meet the overall size and they don't meet the dimensional standards of the zone that they're currently in. So that's kind of the second part of the proposed rezone, is for the majority of that area, and there was 3 maps that covered that area. The majority of that area to go also to that medium density residential, so that their width, depth, and overall size dimension matches that of the zone that they exist in. That opens up capabilities for them to add units to their properties, improves their ability to rebuild in the case of disaster, brings a majority of those lots into conformity with code, which improves the ability to sell and finance properties. I'm seeing that a lot more, where there are a number of properties that have been kind of chopped up over the years, whether legally or illegally, and now are considered non-conforming, and that becomes a problem when someone goes to sell it. So all of these maps were kind of developed, we went through everything together with the work plan committee. They made some adjustments, asked us to move some things around, to include some properties, to exclude some properties, kind of adjusted the lines a little bit. So tonight is kind of just the opportunity for you guys to ask questions, kind of get a feel how we feel about it. This one will be a really long process. There's around 800 properties that will be affected by it. Just doing the legal description, I feel bad for a city surveyor.
Tell him the planning is
I feel bad for you.
apologize.
So this will not be like a quick and dirty. This will honestly probably take the entirety of 25 to complete. We did an upzone a couple of years ago, going from our F2 agricultural zone to R1, the suburban residential zone. That one had 55 properties involved, and that took about 8 months total. So a series of letters goes out, letting everybody know that, hey, this is what's being considered. A second series, so you send one letter out, letting everybody know what's happening. 6 weeks later, 2 months later, you send out a second one, letting them know that they can choose to not participate. And so that one's really important, because if they're not going to participate, they need to be removed from the maps, and then they have to be removed from the legal descriptions that covers all the zones. And so then you would schedule a public hearing. And because the zone change, you guys would hold a public hearing, and then another public hearing would happen at council level. And then 3 readings of the ordinance to make all of the changes to the
This
zones.
goes through the ordinance process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, just like someone coming and asking to rezone a property. City initiated rezones go through the same process. So they require 2 public hearings, ordinances are written, rereadings, and then it's codified. So I know my 3 members of the committee spent a lot of time talking about it. Asked a lot of questions. Do the other 3 members?
Yes, yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, for those who were not, for
Yeah.
those who have not been.
Part of this whole
Yeah, part of the
chaos.
work plan, do you have any questions,
Feel like such an
concerns,
outsider.
comments?
Well, I'm impressed with all the work that you've done. And I'm just kind of looking over matching maps to little areas right now and.
Yes, and
doing-
please forgive my poor drawing skills.
I think
No, I thought you drew.
I tried to match it up as like, as good as I could.
Yeah.
In the memo that I wrote to you guys, I believe I said there was 850. In drawing the maps, there is, because I had done the sunset one separate from Joel going through, and then we had all the discussions in the committee. So there are some overlaps between map 1 and map 4 and the sunset maps. So it's gonna be slightly less than the 850, but it's still pretty close to you. It's still a chunker, so, so that's what I have for you. I would love to facilitate questions or comments or anything else that you have for me.
So I guess my question is, and I'm sure that you've already done this, I mean, identifying any properties that wouldn't fit.
Yes, so in the Sunset area specifically, there is one planned unit development that already exists. It's called the Garfield School Planned Unit Development, so that would not change, that would get to stay alone. There is also this stretch in between kind of the loopy part of Sunset. So it's on the east side of 29th. That is a more recent development. So from like 9th Avenue going south, none of those properties would be included because those are more recent subdivisions. And so they actually meet those R2
Oh, gotcha.
That was already.
definitions. So those ones would be blocked out. And then once you get to like from 9th going north until you hit that Garfield PUD, those ones would be part of the R3. And then ditto, we have like this large F2 over here. That one gets left alone. There's no reason to rezone active farmland, which is what that is. And then your R3 would end up bumping into the commercial zone that runs along East Main.
No, that's the only question I had.
I would just note for the matter of putting it out there, when this starts, if any of you live in this area or these areas or have any family members or anything like that that live in those areas, you most likely don't have a conflict of interest, even if it would materially affect them, because of the fact that it's an action that's gonna be generally applicable to everyone and it is specific.
Not on
Any
individual
person.
basis.
Yeah, it's not
So
individual.
me asking Katie to specifically draw the line for me, since she's.
Well, you would
I'm
potentially be
kidding.
able to, you know, if you're personally.
Yeah.
offended, you could contact me.
So where
It's
do you
just
live?
because it's more general in nature, and it's not specific to an application that you've submitted and it's a city action. We'll address it when it comes up, but, just so that you're thinking to yourself, oh no, should I mention it? Yeah, or before you recuse yourself, it'll be taken care of. And a lot of this will be fine tuned more.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, other things that we'll have to fine tune on the backside of things.
Yeah, this is very high level at this point. I mean, really ghetto map.
30,000 feet.
This is more of a general, kind of identification of the areas that are appropriate. Like I said, there's a lot of work that has to be done on the back end with both like legal descriptions of the areas. I haven't even submitted my RLS to Jennifer yet because I was trying to figure some things out with, the city surveyor before we got that far, because otherwise it's just me sending her maps. I
I
don't-
already did just
Which
get
is
maps.
okay.
I did just get maps with no subject line, no explanation from Joel.
Well, Jill's just leaving it to you to figure out.
It was like scan,
Your
you
guess
know,
is
like
as
when you
good
like
as mine.
generally get the scans from the printer.
Oh, from the printer.
Yeah.
You chose your name. You must be next to him in the list.
I was like,
He's
I'm
wondering where
sure-
that went.
Right, like it can show up.
I said, I'm sure I'll get an email about these later.
Right.
Is this?
So that's what this is.
Alright.
And wasn't there something else about like over in the orchards, Ripon area with like the big
Yes, so
lot?
that one I think is
Yep.
9.
Isn't that
Yes, that's
9?
map number 9.
People
Okay.
keep asking.
So there is a very large parcel, in the orchards, just past the roundabout, just past, Cross Point Church. It is across the street from, a tiny commercial zone that's on that curve.
Yeah.
It's across
Um,
from Early Bird and everything
Yeah,
else.
yeah.
And Barlow
It has
Crest.
been for sale since I moved here.
Yes, so we have had, more people than I can count ask about that property, want to do something with that property, and it's R1. So it's a suburban residential, so that one is being proposed to change from R1 to R4 to allow for it to have some development happen.
And it
the
would be
hope-
nice to
staff's hope
see.
is that that will spur development, that someone will actually move forward with a purchase. I know that the original family still owns that property. And that you'll see something happen there.
That would be a fun little possible commercial outlet.
Yes, and I think the idea behind going to the R4 rather than the R3 is, like Maureen said, those adjustments that the committee has recommended in the R4 zone for the limited commercial items, it being directly across the street from, I believe it's a C3 zone. And there's also a PUD across where the
Yeah.
U-Haul place is. It's a weird little area up there, so it might be appropriate to have some limited commercial,
Neighborhood commercial.
yeah, it's a neighborhood commercial, in that location, you know, coffee shop, barber,
Yeah,
a masseuse, accountant, whatever.
yeah, a little pub.
And eating and drinking establishment.
Eating and drinking establishment, exactly.
So that's what I have for you guys, so. Don't have any other questions? You could make a motion to
Does
finish.
anybody have any other thoughts? Are we good to move ahead with the motion on this? Because if that's the case, then I would be happy to accept a motion to initiate these zoning code amendments.
Will be more than happy to make a motion to initiate zoning code amendments recommended by the Comprehensive Plan Work Plan Development Committee. That is such a long.
Title?
I didn't.
Yeah. To rezone R2 and R2A properties, R3 and R4 along the 21st Street and Thane Road corridors and in and near the Sunset neighborhood.
I will second that.
All right, it's been motioned and seconded, or motioned and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Oh, Kevin came in at the last second. Doesn't sound like any are opposed, so that motion will move forward and we'll start that process. All right, so item 4 on our agenda is staff commission communications.
Okay, so you guys agreed to cancel the
Christmas.
December 25th meeting, so that has been
Yes.
posted and done.
Yay.
Yep.
So our next regular scheduled meeting is January 8th. And just a reminder, that is our first meeting of the year. You will elect a new vice chair and chairperson at that meeting.
All right.
And you can elect the same people, but just
Sucker.
keep that in mind that you can do that again. And that's
Don't miss
all I
that
have.
meeting.
Looks like you have.
I have an announcement. If you ever aspire to ascending to the city council, applications are currently open for a council member vacancy that is set to start roughly the beginning of January. And we'll go through the remainder of that year. And whoever, even if you're the successful candidate, will be expected to run for the position because it is the election year for that particular position and it terminate at the end of the calendar year.
But you would be running as an incumbent.
But you would be running
would be
as an
running as an
incumbent.
Does she have a little name recognition
No?
sometimes?
And then you would be elected and not just appointed.
Then you get a full 4
I
year.
can think of that movie, The Distinguished Gentleman. With Eddie Murphy when he runs the name you know.
And trust, sort of. Yeah, ish.
But they are accepting applications through December 18th. And there's on the December 23rd council agenda, it is anticipated that per city code, the mayor will adopt the application procedures for reviewing those applications. And then the first consideration appointment is roughly January 3rd. I think that's the Monday. The first meeting in January. And I think it's gonna be the work session, if that's
The 6th is the first Monday in January.
okay, so the sixth,
That should be
and
the
then
work session.
following that will be the motion to appoint, I believe.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember the exact dates, but it's generally in that order over the next couple of meetings. If there are no satisfactory candidates, then they'll just keep the application periods open until they get someone that the mayor finds satisfactory.
Oh, they'll get plenty. Satisfactory.
You've been there.
It has received 2 so far.
Really? I am surprised it's only been 2. And I am
That's
not
early.
one of those 2, so.
It's early.
It's as of Monday, so.
Oh, okay.
I've been like waiting till the last
But
minute.
they do
Yeah.
have, two publications in the Lewiston Tribune,
Yeah.
and they've been doing
I've
social
seen, I've
media.
seen it go in the rounds on Facebook.
Yep, I've
the-
seen it
the
on
Facebook.
Been making the rounds on the community groups.
It's been on the community.
And there's
groups on
always gonna
Facebook.
be a flutter at the end.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everybody looks at the calendar and goes, oh,
No,
Oh, I had
they
this
look
before.
and see who's applied and,
That is true, yeah.
I
right,
mean, it's the same thing as an election, and wait till see, oh, these people
who
applied,
filed.
Yeah, yeah.
That's true.
and just normal stuff.
All right, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn and
So
I will.
moved.
Kevin, you didn't let me take executive privilege. It's been motioned and seconded, all in favor? Aye. All right.
Out of here.
Did not have to bang the gavel, but I decided to
Sorry
do it
about
for
that.
posterity. Gosh, Kevin, can't even let my.
I
let me
wasn't
have my
here.